Thank God, the situation is that most of the money that is in our wallet comes from Africa, which we have been exploiting for centuries. Hello everyone. You probably recognize this elderly Monsieur Jacques Chirac, the former president of France, the country that in the 21st century is one of the strongholds of neo-colonialism. Moreover, in its crudest and most blatant form, which in many ways makes it similar to the relationship of classical colonial dependence, which began to take shape in the era of the great geographical discoveries of the 15th century. The victim of French imperialism is Africa. However, unlike other countries that play the role of resource supply for multinational corporations, relations with the Black Continent are not covered by a fig leaf of UN declarations. The French government openly restricts the sovereignty of African states, exerting a direct influence on their internal affairs. And it does this quite legally through the mechanisms enshrined in international agreements. The key instrument of such a policy is the franc zone, a monetary union led by France, which was created mainly on the basis of its former colonial possessions. One of the currencies included in this zone is the Afro franc or CFA franc. This abbreviation consists of the initial letters of the words French African colonies. The CFA franc was established by a decree of the French government in December 1945 as part of the reforms approved by the Bretton Woods Monetary Conference. The weakened post-war France needed to maintain its influence on Africa by all means and use it as a resource for restoring the national economy. The CFA franc became the only official currency of 24 countries in West and Central Africa. Since then, through Afro franc, French capital has successfully exploited the territory where more than 150 million people live. Today, the CFA franc is represented by two currencies at once. One of them is the Franc for Financial Cooperation in Central Africa, BEAC, or the Central African franc. It circulates in countries such as Cameroon, Chad, Central African Republic, Gabon, Congo, and the former Spanish colony of Equatorial Guinea, which joined the franc zone in 1985. The issuer of the currency is the Bank of Central African States. The second currency is the African Financial Community franc, BCEAO, or the West African franc. It is used by Benin, Burkina Faso, Côte d'Ivoire, Mali, Niger, Senegal, Togo, and since 1997, the former Portuguese colony of Guinea-Bissau. Its issue is carried out by the Central Bank of the States of West Africa. The peculiarity of the Afro franc is that its exchange rate is fixed and controlled from the outside. Initially, they established the following ratio. 1.7 French francs were equal to 1 CFA franc. Since 1948, 2 French francs for 1 CFA franc. As the French economy recovered, its national currency strengthened. Since 1994, 1 French franc was equal to 100 CFA francs. And after the formation of the single European currency, 655 Afro francs were given for 1 euro. Thus, the CFA franc rate was artificially inflated from the very beginning and remains so today. This circumstance does not allow local economies to develop. According to their sectorial structure, they are mainly agricultural. The expensive national currency makes it unprofitable to export raw materials, the production of which is the occupation of the most local population. The members of the monetary union cannot devalue the CFA franc, as well as reduce the interest rate. And they probably wouldn't, because representatives of the local comprador bourgeoisie get a lot of benefits from this arrangement. Thanks to the inflated Afro-franc rate, they have the opportunity to purchase imported goods at a profit, providing themselves with a luxurious life against the background of general poverty. The consequence of this policy is a steadily negative trade balance of the countries from the CFA zone. In a record 2015, their total imports exceeded exports by $13 billion. For the local elite to enjoy regular shopping in Milan, the CFA franc should be easily converted into euros at an artificially inflated exchange rate. This property of Afro franc is guaranteed by the French treasury. And in return, it asks for mere trifles. to deposit part of the international reserves of the CFA zone countries on his accounts. Only some 50% and another 20% should be provided against the security of external obligations. Moreover, these funds are placed at interest rates, which often in France took negative values in real terms. African countries actually paid for the fact that their money was used by the French state. With the total amount of foreign exchange reserves of African countries at more than $14 billion, France receives almost $10 billion at its disposal. It has the opportunity to dispose of them at its opinion, invest and lend at interest, including the Africans themselves. Yes, if the countries of the monetary union ask France for a loan, respectable gentlemen from the Ministry of Finance will give them a loan at fixed commercial rates. This, for example, happened in 2008, when against the background of the global crisis, everyone refused to grant loans to the CFA countries because they can manage only 30% of their savings. France came to the rescue, which gave the Africans a loan from their own assets. However, France issues loans to the CFA countries only on the condition that they will be spent on the purchase of French-made goods. And African governments will give priority to the work of French companies. Transnational corporations in France, such as Total and Orano, have exclusive rights to develop the natural resources of their former colonies, which are rich in oil, gas, uranium, diamonds, gold and iron. Due to the fact that the CFA franc was tied to the French franc, France was able to import goods from Africa for its own currency, that is, particularly for nothing. At the same time, restricting access to the region for other large buyers. With the transition to euro, these privileges, in addition to France, were received by the EU leaders, who were able to influence the monetary policy of the European Central Bank. It is interesting that the funds received on credit are not in possession of African debtors for long. Due to the pressure of representatives of France, who are present in the leadership of both central banks of the CFA Franc zone and are also vested with the right of veto, the local monetary authorities ensure the absolute liberalization of financial regulation. This leads to a large-scale outflow of capital from the region. For example, Guinea-Bissau sent 5.5% of its annual GDP abroad between 1970 and 2010. It is not difficult to guess which country the African capital flows to first. Membership in the franc zone has a disastrous effect on the African economies, which are in prolonged stagnation. The French authorities claim that thanks to their intervention, the countries receive a stable currency and prices. However, neoliberal recipes do not work either in Russia or in Africa. The price for low inflation has been the complete lack of economic growth. Real GDP per capita in the UFA region has been falling since mid-70s. 7 countries of the monetary union remain the poorest in the world, and 2/3 of their population are forced to live on less than $2 a day.
And this is not surprising. Without a drop of sovereignty, the CFA countries are sacrificing the common people to French imperialism.
States do not have the ability to control the exchange rate and interest rates and support raw materials export with their help. The only instrument available to them in the competition with neighbors is the so-called internal devaluation. It is expressed in the constant austerity policy, which includes high taxes on household income, minimal budgetary spending on education, health and agricultural support, and large-scale job cuts in the public sector. These actions, carried out on the basis of IMF recommendations, are aimed at reducing the cost of labor as much as possible and decreasing aggregate demand in order to maintain the balance of payments. You may ask, why did the African states agree to participate in the French monetary union? The fact is that this institute was established 15 years before the wave of national liberation movement arose, with some help from the Soviet Union in Africa. The free republics were determined to create their own currencies. However, France set a condition that it would recognize their independence only if they retained membership in the franc zone. Also, the French authorities imposed on the Africans the conclusion of so-called cooperation agreements that regulated a wide range of issues, including mining, terms of foreign trade and international relations, the structure of the armed forces, the higher education system, the work of civil aviation, and much more. These agreements completed the economic and political domination of France over the former colonies, turning their independence into a fiction. Many African countries tried to escape from the yoke of the metropolis, and some of them succeeded. Over the years, Guinea, Djibouti, Comoros, Mauritania, Madagascar left the Franc zone with great difficulty. In other countries, the struggle for independence was not successful. Togo President Sylvanus Olympio was assassinated in a French-backed military coup after announcing the rejection of the CFA Franc in 1960. An enviable fate befell other bright African politicians, including the legendary Thomas Sankara, who tried to resist the French financial dictates. All of them were either killed or overthrown as a result of pro-French coups. In total, since 1960, the French armed forces have participated in military operations on the continent more than 40 times. But time does not stand still. The archaism of the colonial currency is causing more and more social rejection. And not only in Africa, where protests are increasingly breaking out. In France itself, the most progressive part of the politically active population demands from the authorities to close this shameful page in the history of the country. The demand to abolish the CFA Franc system became one of the points of the Yellow Vests ultimatum in 2019. The activists made an appeal to end the policy of plunder, military and political interference in the affairs of the Black Continent, to give the ill-gotten money and property of the dictators to the people of Africa. Immediately return French troops home and negotiate with African states as equal subjects of international law. Chinese and US corporations are also putting pressure on the French authorities. They are hardly concerned about the fate of ordinary Africans, but the local currency, which is tightly tied to the euro, does not allow them to squeeze European business in this region. Anti-French forces are also growing among the African national bourgeoisie. The most powerful economy of the continent, Nigeria, after the liberation from the colonial yoke of Britain, began to spread its influence over neighboring countries, and clearly claims to be a regional leader, capable of concentrating the natural and labor resources of all of West and Central Africa.
At the suggestion of Nigeria, back in 1975, the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, was founded with headquarters in capital of Nigeria. Several countries from the CFA zone entered there. The integration group is constantly developing and even forming its own collective armed forces. In 2000, ECOWAS announced the creation of its monetary union, the West African Monetary Area, and the ECO single currency, the launch of which was initially planned for 2008, but then postponed to 2020.
Sensing an impending threat, the French authorities made an attempt to seize the initiative. In December 2019, Emmanuel Macron, during his visit to Africa, called colonialism a mistake and called for opening a new page in common history. With the support of the fully loyal governments of Côte d'Ivoire and Senegal, he announced the transformation of the CFA Franc system. Members of the Franc zone will no longer have to keep most of their reserves in the French treasury. In addition, the French representation in the management of banks in West and Central Africa has been cancelled. The old name of CFA Franc is changed to a new one, ECO. Yes, Macron simply went and stole this name from Nigeria in order to seize the initiative and force it to accept France's terms. Despite external concessions, Macron's innovations did not please the African public. After all, in fact, the system has remained the same. Its main element has been preserved, the hard exchange rate of ECO to the euro. This means that the policy of manipulating African economies in interests of French corporations will not go anywhere.
In short, the inhabitants of the former colonies still have a long way to go in their struggle for independence. They cannot rely only on their own strengths.
Dictatorial regimes controlled by French capital will diligently suppress any attempts to resist the system of neo-colonial oppression. Hence, proletarian internationalism, international solidarity with the working people of Africa acquires special significance. It is worth taking an example from the progressive French and supporting the Pan-African movements with money and deeds. For example, you can help our channel translate the subtitles of this video into different languages of the world and send it to like-minded people.
The more people learn about the events in Africa, the stronger the public pressure on the conductors of the imperialist policy will be. That will help the peoples of Africa throw off the shackles of colonial exploitation finally.